Hey everybody! Today we are going to learn how to make medicinal teas. A couple things to start off with. A medicinal tea is a preparation that is a little bit different from the tea that you might make with a tea bag. Traditionally or commonly, you think of a tea as something you rip open from a little package and you plunk in your cup a couple times, and once you see color, you remove the bag and enjoy the tea. However, with a medicinal quality tea, it's a little bit different. You're generally going to be using a dried loose herb. And the reason being is a dried herb is a little bit more potent than a fresh herb when it comes to rehydrating it, right? A fresh herb can't really be rehydrated. So it takes a little bit more herbs to make the same quality of tea. And then you also want the herbs to be able to move freely. You want them to be as fresh as possible, and you want to use the right dosing. So with all of that in mind, let's get started. Today we're going to be using thyme. Thyme is a very common culinary herb that if you don't already have in your kitchen cabinet, you can easily buy at most grocery stores. Thyme has been used across the world for thousands of years in cooking, and it's still used today, which speaks to how easy and delicious and safe it is. So a rule of thumb is that the more common an herb is, the safer it is. And thyme is pretty safe. Its medicinal qualities are antimicrobial and antibacterial. It's overall really great for the immune system, and it has a particular affinity to the lungs. So when it enters the body, it kind of protects the lungs. It also kind of comes through the lungs, and it's really specific for this time period as far as reducing infection and protecting the lungs. So we're gonna make a medicinal quality thyme tea today. I will say that while I do enjoy the flavor of thyme, it might not be one that's your first pick. And from what you learned today, you can choose to make blends in your own kitchen with your apothecary of herbs and spices to make something that's a little bit more flavorful or a little bit more palatable, because you can get pretty medicinal taste with just thyme. But to keep things simple, we will measure out 2 tablespoons. I have my tablespoon here. It's the big guy of thyme. So you can do this by eyeballing it once you get the hang of it, but I do think it's good to measure when you first get used to it so you can see what 2 tablespoons look like. I should say that the official ratio is 1 tablespoon per cup of water, and the container that I'm using here is a glass jar that is a pint, and that's about 2 cups, right? It's the size of an ice cream container. So here you have it. It covers most of the bottom. It's a little light green leaf. You can smell it, pretty fragrant. And you're going to want to have a lid and a strainer. But I will recommend that you don't use a strainer right away, because part of the quality of medicinal tea is that you let it steep. So go ahead and pour the hot water over the tea. Fill it all the way up to the top and put on the lid. Anybody know why you would want to have a lid for this job? So one idea is to avoid it spilling or having things get in it. But the main reason is because thyme is full of essential oils and plant chemicals, phytochemicals, that are the medicine. And we want to keep them in the jar, in the water, in the tea, rather than letting them leave through the steam. So a lid is quite important. As you can see, it's kind of a clearish, yellowish color, and that's going to change over time. You want your tea to steep for about 20 minutes to 1 hour, and potentially longer if you have it. You can steep teas up to 8 hours if you like, and those tend to be what I call overnight infusions, and those are for nutritive teas like nettles, raspberry leaf, oat straw, alfalfa, commonly used by pregnant people, but really great kind of liquid multivitamin for everyone. So that's something to keep in mind. But when you're making an infusion or a tea, that's not as nutritive, right? We're using this for the immune properties. You can do a minimum of 20-30 minutes. And if you have a little bit longer, that's great. So you can set the timer, or you can just walk away and come back in a little bit. But we do want to let it sit for at least a half to 1 hour. So you let the herbs move around. Any herb that is the aerial parts, right, the leaves, the above ground parts of the plant is what this recipe is qualified for. There's another preparation called a decoction, and that would be appropriate for roots, berries, barks, anything that's woody. And that's going to be a different video, but it's kind of like making rice. You bring it to a boil, you let it simmer, and then you enjoy it after a while. So, time lapse. Here we have a tea that I made about 20-30 minutes ago. You can see it's a bit of a different color. It's a little bit darker. You will notice that colors change once you let it sit. So all the leaves have been able to move freely. They've been extracting into the water. And we're good to go. We're ready to go. So here's my mug. I'm going to use my strainer. I love this strainer. I think it's really the best because you're allowed to either use it as on top of the cup, or if you wanted to, you could have strained it in the jar. But I will say that the best medicinal teas are ones that are allowed to move freely in the water. So either way, it's good to have this guy on hand. I'm just going to pour my tea into my mug. This is kind of acting as the teapot. So that's something to keep in mind too. If you want to use a teapot, you can, or a jar is quite handy. And there you have it. You can take out the strainer, add a little honey if you like, or little milk, whatever you want to enjoy your tea, and we're done. Cheers.